Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor. With me is the historical novelist, Elena Maria Vidal.
Word from our affiliate, Bishop Sheen Rosaries. You've probably worn through the chain of your cheap plastic rosary. Other rosaries simply can't stand up to the wear and tear of everyday life. Bishop Sheen rosaries are made of solid metal beads and paracord to withstand any condition, and are backed with a lifetime warranty. Upgrade your rosary to a Bishop Sheen rosary made to fit your lifestyle, or buy one for a friend. Each rosary sold supplies 2 weeks of food for a school kid in Uganda. You use the exclusive link down below to help support our efforts here at Plotlines. The link will take you to sheenrosaries.com. Be sure to use the code Plotlines10.
Welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Connor.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. Yeah, we've already started a great conversation. We could just talk all day about all these wonderful things. We were talking about Bernard Fay's book, Louis XVI ou la fin d'un monde, which is Louis XVI and the End of a World. Yeah. And I was saying how I found my copy in Lourdes when I was visited it in Lourdes in 1994. I found a wonderful bookstore there, and it was the same place where they had the Latin Mass. And so I was able to get a copy of that, and that ended up being part of the foundation of helping me build the character of Louis XVI for my novel Trianon, which was my first novel.
Tell us about your books first, so we can get a sort of understanding of sort of started and.
Okay, sure. I in 1990, I believe it was 1995, I made a trip to Austria, and I with a friend of mine whose daughter was the Austrian canvas of Steubenville. And so we traveled with her daughter. We traveled all over Austria, and I was able to visit the Capuchin crypt where Marie Antoinette's mother, the Empress Maria Theresa, is buried. And I was praying for her. And it was after I prayed at her tomb, the tomb of the Empress Maria Theresa, that I really was inspired to write a novel about Marie Antoinette and to try to present the truth, but in a fictional way, in a light kind of, not that it's a light story, but in a fictional way but yet something that could appeal to teenagers and could be used in homeschooling programs, because at the time there was a lot of talk of how there wasn't a lot of Catholic literature for young high school students and middle school students who were being homeschooled. So I thought, well, I'll try to write something for young adults and high school students. So I wrote Trianon, and then people were asked for which was about Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI and their family and how they prepare for death. And so it's a deep novel, but at the same time I try to show them as they were, and with their warts and all. And people have said I made them too holy, but you know, people now, unless the people are out committing adultery, they think everyone's too holy. You know, people just living a faithful married life doesn't mean they're saints. It doesn't make them the little flower, but it means that they're just trying to live a Catholic life, which is what they were trying to do. Then in 1990, around 2000, Trianon was published in 1997. So then in the year 2000, in Neumann Press, I published Madame Royale, which was the sequel of Trianon. It was about their daughter and their only surviving child, and how she helps to rebuild the church in France after the Revolution, and also her search for what became of her brother, Louis XVII. So then after that, I thought I'd write something different. So I wrote, it wasn't published till 2009, but I wrote The Night's Dark Shade, which was about the mystery of the things about the mysterious Cathars in the south of France, who are a heretical group who almost became very close to having a huge amount of power and influence in the south of France. And it's about a young girl who ends up at a castle run by the Cathars, a young Catholic girl, and how she's the temptations that she has. And so they're very much like the modern people in many ways. So then after that book, I wrote and that did very well. So then I wrote The Paradise Tree, which came out in 2014, and that was about my Irish ancestors and why they came to Canada and how their faith helped them through many, many ups and downs. Now, The Paradise Tree was number in the top 20 of Kirkus. Then they have like a number 1 through 20 books of indie authors, and mine was in the top 20. And I was really pleased with that. And then after The Paradise Tree, I did my biography of Marie Antoinette. I took all my research about Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and I put it all together in a biography and my bibliography, because people always ask me, well, what's your reason for this portrayal of them? So I put I put all my sources in there and discussed them at length. So those are my books. It's 4 historical novels and 1 biography. And I am presently working on a novel, a trilogy actually, about Charles I, King of England, and his wife, Henrietta Maria, who the queen for whom Maryland was named. And Henrietta Maria, was a very devout Catholic.
Yeah.
And suffered a lot for her faith. So I'm researching that. I started writing it, but I'm still in the middle of my research. I was planning to go to England last May, but of course that was canceled. So I'm going to try to go in the coming spring and do my research. Going to go to Oxford and study. There's a professor there who's going to show me around and everything. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm going to try to break it up into 3 different novels, and so that part of it can be out while I'm writing the rest of it. And because otherwise I'll be writing, it'll be 10 or 15 years before I finish one book if I put it all together, because it's going to be long. So I thought I'll do the first part and then publish that while I'm writing the second and third parts.
Gotcha.
So that's what I'm doing. So that's it.
Nice. Are you familiar with Jane Lane? The novelist?
No, I don't think so.
I am reading her book. It's called May Devil May Care or something like that. And it's
okay.
And it's a historical novel in the English Civil War.
Oh, yes. Okay. I'll have to look that up, because the English Civil War I've actually read some other novels about the English Civil War to see how other people have done it, because it's a very complicated time of history.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's more complicated than the French Revolution, if you can believe that. And it was all very religious. Everybody was very religious. So
it probably is it's a tad more complicated, probably because there's 3 wars going on at once. Really.
Exactly.
So it in the French Revolution, it's just one problem or one.
Yes.
And,
yes.
But anyway, so I believe Jane Lane is her pen name, and she was, I believe, a Catholic historical novelist as well.
Oh, okay. I'll look her up. Thank you for recommending that to me. I found one of the things, the most difficult things about the French Revolution is the total misunderstanding most people have of the character of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. And so I've spilled a great deal of ink trying to show the truth about them. People are always trying to portray Louis XVI as a tyrant and someone who didn't want to give up the old ways and, didn't want people to have their freedom. And the thing is, Louis XVI could only be characterized as a liberal. He was very liberal. He was very open to the Enlightenment. He was very open to reform. He was a great reformer on his own. He was the first king of France to give full civil rights to Jews and to Protestants, which they had not had completely ever before. And he, at the end of his reign, there were 6 books of laws, new laws that he had passed to better the people, of reforming laws. He abolished torture. He abolished the corvée, by which the peasants had to maintain the roads. And so now he changed it so that it would be maintained by the army, by the soldiers. The French army, Royal Army, would have to maintain the roads. And so he also, there was a lot of things, a lot of rights and civil rights that he gave, and he was very open to change. And he and Marie Antoinette reformed a lot of the court old ways that had been. For instance, the Queen had to have the Queen had to have her baby in public, and Marie Antoinette had her first child in public. And she almost died of suffocation because there were so many people in the room. People were standing on chairs, so she couldn't get a breath of air. Even, when they opened the windows, and it was the middle of winter, she fainted. She almost died. So after that, Louis XVI abolished that custom, and he said from now on the Queen, will have her baby in private with maybe, some official witnesses, because they had to witness and make sure the Queen was really the baby was really the Queen's child, and all that. It went back to the Middle Ages when they were afraid of people, of changelings and things like that. So he changed that. Pardon?
Which is really interesting. There's one of the sort of propaganda during the Glorious Revolution.
Yes.
Them considering the son of the king to be a imposter.
Yes, that the warming pan baby. They're trying to say that exactly. They were trying to say that the baby was spirited in, and that was just such a ridiculous story. I mean, it was very easily shown to be false, but they played that up as an excuse to overthrow a legitimate monarch. And James's daughters knew they were in the wrong, and both of them felt guilty. Mary felt guilty until the day she died, and Anne, I don't know if Anne felt guilty, but Anne had so many misfortunes and bad health and everything. I just don't think either of them were really ever at peace with what they did to their father. And, it broke his heart because people said, oh, well, what a stupid thing he did was to throw the Great Seal into the Thames and run off. But the thing is, his heart was broken when his daughters, and now that I'm studying the English Civil War and the things that Charles and James, the sons, Charles II and James II, the things that they went through as young boys with their father. They were right with their father almost through the whole war, or else they were escaping and running away and having, they saw battle. They were both, their family was completely broken up. Their family was never together again. Their parents, their mother was in France, their father was in England. Their mother tried to get back she tried to reach the father, but they wouldn't let her. But James and Charles, the things that they went through, they were so traumatized by that. And I think when James went, his daughters turned on him, I just think it so broke his heart that he just couldn't take it. I feel very bad. I'm still exploring all that issue, but that was a very tragic. They didn't want him as a Catholic. They didn't want a Catholic monarch, and there were people that were ready to do anything to keep there from being a Catholic monarch of England.
Yeah, no, it's just an interesting comparison to the time. But
it is.
Louis and his reforms.
Yes, well, Louis's reforms were incredible. And speaking of the Stuarts, Marie Antoinette had in her service some ladies. They were of Scottish descent who were actually descended from James. They were James, the illegitimate children or illegitimate grandchildren of James II. And I think it was the Princess de Chimay. Several of her ladies. One of them was a direct descendant and who was Scottish, and the other one was married to one of the illegitimate children. That's all in my biography. Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette, daughter of the Caesars, is a whole chapter about her various ladies in waiting. And Marie Antoinette herself corresponded with Cardinal York, who was the grandson of James II and was the brother of Bonnie Prince Charlie. And he was, Marie Antoinette wrote to Cardinal York at the Vatican and asked him to give refuge and protection to her ladies who she had sent to escape from the revolution. She wanted to make sure she sent away all her ladies so that they would be safe. And so they went to Rome, and Cardinal York gave them protection. Now, you know, Princess de Lamballe, of course, came back. She had escaped to England, but she came back because she wanted to be at the side of the king and queen and their difficulties. And, of course, you know what happened to her. She was torn to pieces by the mob. So that was something, too. But Louis, as I said, talking about Louis is always, there's an image of him as being this fat, kind of sleepy, sort of stupid, you know, unkempt sort of a person. Now, Louis was a man's man, and that he wasn't the type of powdered courtier. He was a man who liked hunting. He was a lot like his great-great-great-grandfather, Henry IV of France, who was a man's man, who liked to be out hunting. You know, he wasn't into powder and perfume and wearing silk all the time, and he liked to be out, he liked to work with his hands. He had a forge in his attic where he was a very proficient locksmith. He also was an amateur cartographer. He made maps. They said he knew geography. He could have been a geography professor, or he could have been a Latin professor because his Latin was so good. And that he was a brilliant man. Every morning at the council, he would read his letters while his ministers would offer their reports. And he'd be reading his mail, and they said he never missed anything. He could read these letters, and then you listen to, they never missed a word of the report, because then he'd ask them questions about what they had just reported to him, and he didn't miss a word. He had an incredible intellect, which people don't realize about Louis. Louis the 16th, he may have had Asperger's, which, of course, they didn't know about at that time. But he was slightly solitary, and he was kind of to himself. He was very awkward, had some awkwardness to him. And, but he, you know, people, as they know, a lot of times people with Asperger's are geniuses. Yeah. They have this incredible high IQ, and that's what Louis the 16th had. And he had a great understanding of France and his people, and was very open to new ideas, things that he thought were a good idea. And of course, he was the one who helped the America to fight against Great Britain and win our independence, because Louis could see down the line this was good, to saying there was a big country was going to be here, and be better for that country to start out as an ally of France. So it would be better for France in the long run if the new United States was on the side of France. And look at all the times we've helped them since then, you know. Yeah. So that was because of Louis being farsighted and open-minded enough. Because Marie Antoinette didn't think he should help. She said, you can't help colonists rebel against their lawful sovereign. I don't think that's a good idea. But Louis said, well, for one thing, there are unjust laws against Catholics in the American colonies. And if we help, because colonists will be helping our fellow Catholics to have freedom of worship. So that was also another reason why he helped them. So he was a very great man. And they're always trying to say he was ugly, obese, smelly, and stupid. He was a very muscular man. He was all muscle. He could pick up a page. You know, a page boy could stand at the end of a shovel, and Louis could pick it up with one arm. They said that's the kind of strength he had in his arms. He had very strong. He was, you know, he got kind of heavy later in life because he had a huge appetite, and he was a little shy in his manner, but he was. Actually, they said people who saw him close up, they always say he was ugly. He was actually very handsome, and he had a full mouth. According to the way people looked at the time, he was actually considered handsome. He had beautiful eyes. He had very beautiful hair. that they kept back, and everything. And also he bathed. He took baths every day. He had 2 tubs, one for soaking and one for rinsing. And so he went horseback riding every day, then went hunting whenever he could. So as soon as he'd come home, he would go and soak in his tub and then rinse in the other tub. So he was very clean. And he was a brilliant, brilliant man. See, they always try to make him unappealing to say, well, that's why Marie Antoinette committed adultery. And of course, there is absolutely no evidence that Marie Antoinette committed adultery. In fact, all the evidence is to the contrary, that she was a faithful wife, and not only faithful and in the fact she was not an adulteress, but faithful in that she stayed with her husband at great cost to herself.
Yeah.
So when she was in every right, she could have escaped like Queen Henrietta Maria. I mean, she could have escaped. And Louis XVI even said to her, "You've got to escape like Queen Henrietta Maria did." And Marie Antoinette said, "I am not Henrietta of France." She said, I will not leave my husband. I will die at your feet and with my children in my arms.
One of the things I think is really interesting is his schooling. He had I think it was a tutor for every subject, and I find that personally being at a university right now, I just find education so painful and so unhelpful.
Yes. Oh yes.
When it seems like the system had much better results in sort of in a manner.
Well, Louis XVI, his 2 teachers had been picked out for him by his father before his father died. His father was a very religious Catholic. He was very devout. So was his mother. Now both of them died when Louis was around, pretty young. So he became the Dauphin. He was only around 10 when he became the Dauphin. And before that, of course, his older brother had died, and the older brother was the Dauphin, or was supposed to be the Dauphin, the Duke of Burgundy. And when he died of tuberculosis, and Louis actually had caught tuberculosis from his brother when he was about 5. People don't realize this, and that's one of the reasons that he had such an intense appetite, why he had to eat, because it made him hungry. But that's also why he had to have lots of fresh air and exercise on a daily basis to keep the tuberculosis from spreading into his lungs and everything. They said as long as he got outside and had lots of fresh air, he'd be okay. But they think that later it came back, and when he was in prison in the temple, and that's why he was snoring very heavily. And he also suffered from deep depression. And they said tuberculosis, even when it's kind of dormant, it can cause terrible depression. And so when Louis XVI, at the outbreak of the Revolution, right before 1787, they lost their baby daughter, their youngest daughter, Madame Sophie. And then 1789, right at the outbreak of the Revolution, they lost their oldest son, Louis Joseph, and that was devastating. He died of tuberculosis, just like Louis XVI's oldest brother, who was also Louis Joseph. He had died of tuberculosis. So watching another child who was close to him die of tuberculosis probably set off all the memories of when he was a little boy and his brother had died. And plus it was his son, So after that, his son died. He had really deep depression. It probably would have been clinical depression. And he started drinking more wine. They said he was going through a lot of wine. And I'm not saying he was an alcoholic or that he was drunk or anything, but he was just trying to make it through. And it's amazing he was able to get through 4 years of the revolution, and he and Marie Antoinette were able to get through that together, because really they were supposed to have been killed on the night of October 5th and 6th when the mob marched, in 1789 when the mob marched on Versailles. The king and queen were supposed to have been murdered that night. And the fact that they survived 4 more years just through their presence of mind and their ability to subdue a mob. There were times when each of them were able to calm the mob down, people who wanted to tear them to shreds. And the fact they were able to do that just by their presence said a lot for them and for their character. So Louis, back to his education, his father had chose tutors for him to be brought up. So he was brought up in a very moral way, and they wanted a strong emphasis on him caring for his people, and the fact that when he was when they were baptized, the French royal family, they were baptized at birth, but then they had a formal christening when they were about 5 or 6. So Louis and his brothers and sisters had their holy anointing, their christening when they were older. And then when they were christened, their father took them to the parish church of Versailles and showed them the registry. And he said, here, your names are here with the names of the peasant children, because in the eyes of God, all are equal. So that was something Louis kept all his life, that in the eyes of God, everyone is equal, and that people who had been given the responsibility of power by God then had a huge responsibility and duty to the people. And Louis kept that before him constantly. So did Marie Antoinette. And that was part of his education, was very much. Now, Marie Antoinette always thought Louis had a horrible education and that it was up to her to teach him how to behave, because his education really focused more intellectual. It didn't focus much on being a courtier and interacting with people and social skills. So Marie Antoinette felt she had to teach Louis. He had to teach Louis his social skills and his conduct and how to be a prince and everything like that, and help him out of his shyness and everything. So she always took credit for that herself. She thought he had a horrible education, but we can tell he had a very good kind of liberal arts education. He studied geography, Latin languages. He spoke English perfectly. He read Shakespeare, and he read it in the original English and everything. And he studied Erasmus. He studied all the great philosophers and everything. So he also wrote. He was encouraged to write his own books, and he wrote his own book on how to be a good monarch and what are the qualities of a good monarch. And gave it to his grandfather, Louis XV, and Louis XV saw it as a reproach. He thought Louis was trying to teach him, and he was so upset. Louis XV had the type broken up, so it couldn't be printed again. And Louis XVI was just a boy, and he was very devastated by that.
Yeah. It's interesting, just sort of the style of education sounds really beautiful to me. I'm much more fond of like the Oxfordian type of education with tutors and all that jazz versus the standard German turned
absolutely
Frankfurt school, I guess, is it called?
Yeah, I agree. They have schools like that. There's a school like that in Annapolis, St. John's in Annapolis is supposed to be like, the Great Books program. And you read, and then you get together and you discuss with your professor. Mm-hmm. And when you study mathematics, you read the ancient Greek mathematicians. Euclid, you study Euclid is when you do mathematics. And when you study you used to read Plato and everything. You read all the great books. I think that's a very important way of education. And that's the way Louis XVI was educated. Yeah. And of course, he loved science. He was very interested in science. And he did a lot to sponsor scientists and like Lavoisier, the great chemist Lavoisier, and people like that. And Louis also was very fascinated with natural history. And he outfitted a voyage with a very famous naturalist. He had a ship. They sailed all through the Pacific and down all around New Zealand. They circumnavigated New Zealand, and they collected La Perouse, the voyage of La Perouse. He hired La Perouse, and he outfitted a ship with scientists and priests, and all the priests on the ship were scientists. And that he didn't want it to be a voyage of conquest. He wanted it to be a voyage of scientific exploration, and if possible, to spread the faith, to bring the faith to the countries where they visited. So anyway, they sailed around New Zealand, and they sailed all through the South Pacific and the islands, and now they never made it back because they were captured by cannibals, and all of them were eaten by cannibals, except a few who escaped. Of men from the voyage escaped with some of the charts and the drawings and the findings, and they were able to make it back to France. But when they got back to France, Louis XVI had already been executed, so he never got to see the results of this incredible voyage that he had outfitted and wanted them to find and everything. So people don't even know about that. That voyage actually opened up a lot for other explorers. And people going, people going to Australia and sailing all around the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific and everything. So it was actually a really fabulous voyage. I have couple blog posts on it with some of the original sketches and pictures that they brought back. And so no, Louis was an incredible king as far as reform. Now, one of the things he also did that people don't realize, he was very interested in botany. So was Marie Antoinette. They're interested in botany and horticulture. And they introduced the potato to France because France had always been troubled by grain failures, failure of the harvest. If they had a rainy summer or a rainy winter, and of course there had been, I think it was in 1787, there was this volcano in Iceland, which is still there, and it erupted and it caused this really bad weather all over France, England, France, Northern Europe and down into France, and it caused a lot of the summer to be very cool, and it caused grain failure, the harvest failure, and even some of the fruit trees didn't do too well, and the grapes didn't do too well, and all the things that the French, live on, none of them did too well. So Louis, the things like that had happened before in France. They had famines, periodical famines. So that's why Louis introduced the potato, because that would be something that was more hardy. It couldn't be easily killed, except like in Ireland after that potato blight, but that was a whole different story. That's a whole different story. But in France, that was something they could store it over the winter. It was easy to grow. People couldn't, things couldn't happen to it. It didn't need a lot of care. It wasn't as temperamental as wheat. So that's why he and Marie Antoinette, in fact, they first planted the first potatoes at her private gardens of Trianon. And they started wearing potato blossoms. He wore one in his lapel, and she had a corsage made of potato blossoms. And they did everything they could to encourage the peasants to grow them and everything. And it became a staple of the French peasant. It became a staple of their diet and everything, and kept a lot of people from starving to death. But people make fun of Louis. Oh, he introduced potatoes, but that was something, a practical, easy way to help the people have a staple crop.
Yeah.
So he did amazing. There were amazing things like that he did, and protections he gave to the Jews and to synagogues, and and Marie Antoinette and all her work with homes for unwed mothers and helping orphans. There were a lot of abandoned children, and people, were just babies would be left on someone's doorstep. So Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette started a lot of foundling hospitals that were run by nuns, and places for the little orphans to be taken care of. And they also had homes for young mothers who didn't have, who were thrown out of their household for being pregnant, and they took them in. And then themselves, they adopted a lot of children. They took some of them to the palace, and the others, Marie Antoinette paid for their education and make sure they were brought up properly and everything. And all of that, that's in my book. My book, Marie Antoinette, Daughter of the Caesars, I go into all of that. Mm-hmm. So Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were very, very open-minded, as in a good way, but they were also very moral. And Marie Antoinette banned a lot of the some of the risque sorts of plays that they used to have at Versailles, she would not allow them, and she wouldn't allow them at the young school for Saint-Cyr, which was for young aristocratic young ladies. Marie Antoinette read every single book and play that was out there, so she would know what the girls would be allowed to read.
Mhm.
And she was very particular about morals. She did not like off-color jokes or dirty jokes. People knew they couldn't talk in a crude way around her. She had no tolerance for it at all, which was different because the other queen, the Polish queen, who had actually everyone thought was very religious, she sometimes liked things that weren't, were kind of off-color. She thought they were funny. They thought Marie Antoinette was very prudish.
Gotcha.
So, but anyway, and Louis, of course, Louis was slightly more, he was a guy, he would, with the other guys, they would be kind of coarse, but he wasn't that way around Marie Antoinette. He was very respectful of his wife.
I have two things. It's really interesting. When I read the story of his experience when his oldest brother was dying from tuberculosis, and when he got it, I swear, that's the only time that I've ever experienced like my eyes tearing up while reading history.
Oh yeah, well that's in Bernard Fay's book. That is a really well done. No, that book is so well written. That just makes you love Louis XVI forever. It was that was very, very good. I know exactly what you mean. I cried when I read that. It was very, very hard on him, and he was treated by his family as if they were so devastated that Louis Joseph had died. Then they acted as if like they wished that Louis Auguste. That was Louis XVI was Louis Auguste. They wished almost like they had wished he had died instead, because he was not as promising and didn't seem as bright and cheerful and charming as his older brother. And so he went through a lot of depression and rejection, even as a very small child, from that. And the one who really helped him was Madame Marzin, was his governess. And I think she was very loving with him. But of course, he was taken away from her to be with the men. Usually the boys were kept in the nursery, and they wore little dresses. The boys, until they were about 5 or 6, they wore little dresses. And they stayed in the nursery with the governess, and then until they were 7. And then they had a breeching ceremony where they were put on their first pair of knickers, and they were handed over to the men for to be educated as a gentleman. And now Louis was taken away from his governess when he was only 5, because they said his brother needed his company. So he was put in men's clothes and everything as a little tiny boy. And he really wasn't ready. I think he was the kind of child that he probably was a little behind as far as social development. I think he would have been better off. He probably could have stayed with his governess till he was 8 or something like that and been fine. But he was taken away when he was 5. It was very traumatic for him. And then he was in a situation where everything focused on his brother, who was dying a horrible death. And dying from tuberculosis is not pretty. It's very unsightly for people around, and there's a very, the stench, just the smells of the person, the body that it gives off when it's in that state. It's a very horrible disease. There's a lot of blood, a lot of putrid things. It's very, very unpleasant. And Louis was too little, really. He was expected to be act like an adult around this situation when he was just practically out of being a toddler, and it was very upset. And he saw both of his parents were utterly devastated by his brother's sickness. And I don't think he ever really recovered from that. It took him a long time to kind of come out of his shell after that. He really didn't come out of his shell much until he married Marie Antoinette. And when they really started falling in love and having a relationship and having their children, he came out of it. But it all came crashing back when his own son died, and they had a very difficult time with that. But I'm glad you're reading that book.
speaking of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI's relationship, what would you like to give sort of an overview of their relationship and how it began, sort of how it flowed?
Yes, well, their relationship began when they were 14. She was 14 and he was 15. And both of them were young for their age. He was a young 15-year-old and she was a very young 14-year-old. In fact, she didn't even look like she was 14. They said she looked more like she was 12. She was just a little girl. And so they were both too young to be a married to be a true fully married couple. So they and he was shy of her too, because he had been told that France had been destroyed by his grandfather's mistress, Madame de Pompadour. So he'd been told to watch out for wild, loose women. And of course, here comes Marie Antoinette. She has the same name as his grandfather's mistress. Madame de Pompadour was Antoinette. So he is very suspicious of a girl. Not only is this a girl has a seductress, but she's also an Austrian. And the Austrians were their enemies. And he was told by his aunts, he had several old maiden aunts who lived at the palace and were the oldest, some of the daughters of Louis XV. Louis XV had 10 children, most of whom were, in fact, all of whom except one were girls. And there were always some of them around the palace. And Madame Adelaide, who was his aunt, and I think she was his godmother too. Anyway, she was always telling him, the Austrians are this, Austrians are terrible. The Austrian, the l'Autrichienne, she was the first one to call Marie Antoinette l'Autrichienne. L'Autrichienne is here to learn the secrets of France. So he kept his very strong reserve around Marie Antoinette. And Marie Antoinette really had to work to win him over just as a friend. So they eventually became friends, and then they began to be sweethearts. And now they had trouble consummating their marriage because people always said it was Louis's fault, that he was impotent and or things like that. But they said, no, there was nothing wrong with Louis at all. In fact, even Marie Antoinette's brother said there was nothing wrong with Louis physically at all. And how he would know, he claims Louis told him, but I think, I don't know that Louis would have told Joseph anything. Mm-hmm. It was Marie Antoinette's fault. Marie Antoinette was just a very young girl. And there was a problem that she had that it would eventually go away, but it just took longer to consummate the marriage. Mm-hmm. And I go into detail in my book. My book goes into the nitty-gritty of all of that. So it was very difficult for them for a while. It took until she was like 21 and he was 22 before they fully consummated their marriage. So, but meanwhile, there were rumors going around and everyone thought that he had problems and that he was impotent and that she was taking lovers. So that really started the obsession with Marie Antoinette's her personal life with her body that later turned into these horrible pornographic cartoons and did everything to drag her into the mud. And it was very unfortunate, but it all started in the court with the gossip of the courtiers. Now, of course, Marie Antoinette had her first child when she was 22, and which is actually a good age to have your first child. She was probably too young to carry a child. Some women are just not ready as when they're teenagers, but when she was 22, she had her first child, mm-hmm. and they had 4 more children, and they really became a very devoted couple. Now, later on, after they had the diamond necklace scandal, and after her youngest daughter died, Marie Antoinette kind of had a breakdown. And Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, they didn't have any children after that. And there are different reasons why. Some people said, she was having an affair with Axel von Fersen, but they said that's absolutely not true because at that time she became very religious, intensely religious. And Louis, was dragged into the problems that were leading up into the revolution. And so they probably were just practiced, continence between them, a lot like many couples do, especially when one of them has health problems. And Marie Antoinette had a lot of health problems and issues, and especially after her child died, and she was just not well. She was having these nervous panic attacks all the time and everything. So, but she turned to religion to give her strength. So that was part of the reason. People are always looking for romantic reasons, thinking, oh, Marie Antoinette had a lover, and that just is not in her character. She would not have done something like that. And also, she wouldn't have had the opportunity, even if she'd wanted to, because there were always servants around.
Yeah.
So I've spilled a lot of ink on paper showing the reasons why, because people are so obsessed with this rumor about herself and Count von Fersen. And Count von Fersen was a friend of both Louis and Antoinette, and he tried to help them escape. He was the agent of their friend, the King of Sweden, who had come to visit them, and incognito. And he was so charmed, the King of Sweden was so charmed by Louis and Antoinette that later they said he wanted to become a Catholic, but he was murdered. Before he became a Catholic, he was stabbed at the masked ball. But he loved Louis and Antoinette, and he told Count von Fersen to do whatever he had to do to save them, to rescue them. And he was doing more. The Swedes were doing more to save Louis and Antoinette than any of their family, any of their relatives, anybody else.
Yeah, that's just a shame that, they weren't able to succeed.
Yeah, it is. The other person who helped them was later helped their daughter, didn't get to help them, was Tsar Paul. Tsar Paul, when he was a Tsarevich, he and his wife, Grand Duchess Maria Fyodorovna, visited Versailles and incognito, but everyone knew who they were. And they had a wonderful time with Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The four of them got along beautifully. They became really good friends. And Louis XVI's little girl, Marie-Thérèse, came to Tsarevich Paul and sat on his lap, and she said, I like you. You're a nice man, and someday I'm coming to see you. Well, later on, she was in exile, and he gave her a castle to stay in. He made sure she was protected and safe, and gave that. And they said it was only because of her that he helped the rest of the Bourbon family. It was because of her that he remembered her from her, and he knew her parents and how kind they had been to him. So it's very, interesting how these things all happen. But yeah, people weren't able to save. Axel von Fersen wasn't able to save them. He really tried. I mean, they did escape. They escaped, but they were captured at Varennes. And that's a very, 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 very sad story. And they were on their way to Montmédy, where there was a fort, and the king had soldiers where he needed to get out of Paris and away from his enemies so he could take a stand and rally the people to him, even though he didn't want to have civil war. He was doing everything to avoid civil war. In fact, he was the one, he would never let them fire on the people. He wouldn't let his soldiers do their job because he just couldn't stand for any French blood to be shed. And, and his sister, Madame Elizabeth, at her trial, they said, you are the sister of the last tyrant of France. And she said, if my brother had been such a tyrant, I would not be here now. So, it was a very, very, very sad situation, and in many, many ways. But, Louis, yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. So, regarding Bernard Fay's book, it's interesting. Just what would you say to his remarks regarding sort of her, Marie Antoinette's, sort of associations with the philosophes, or the sort of the sort of intellectual class that hated Louis XVI?
Well, Marie Antoinette, really, she was not a big reader. Okay, she read novels, but she was not a great intellect. Not as much as like Madame de Staël or even Grand Duchess Maria Fyodorovna. Marie Antoinette was not a big intellect. Now, Marie Antoinette was friends with Princess de Lamballe. Now, Princess de Lamballe was the head of the Lady Freemasons for all of France, and she was very intellectual. They tried to portray her as a ninny and a simpleton, but Madame de Lamballe was a very well-read and very intellectual, and was friends with a lot of the philosophes and the Enlightenment people. And her salon was more of an intellectual sort of thing. that's why Louis the 16th, he got Marie Antoinette to be friends with Madame de Polignac, because Madame de Polignac wasn't in that circle of philosophes and everything the way Madame de Lamballe was. So that's why Louis the 16th encouraged his wife to be friends with Madame de Polignac and her circle of friends, because he figured they may have been, after money and things like that, but at least they weren't like trying to lead her into being a liberal. He was afraid he didn't want her ending up being with the Freemasons and all that. So he thought that he and Maurepas encouraged Marie Antoinette in her friendship with Madame de Polignac. In fact, Louis, some people even have tried to say that Madame de Polignac was Louis's mistress and that one of her children was really his child. And knowing Louis, I just have trouble believing that. And but he was friends with the Polignacs, and they are the only people whose home the king would visit. It's the only private home he ever visited was the home of Madame de Polignac and her husband, Monsieur and Madame de Polignac. That was the only people he ever visited in their private home. So he held them in very, very high regard. He also wrote her letters, Madame de Polignac letters, after she left, after Bastille Day. Marie Antoinette told them to leave France for their safety. So Louis wrote them a letter, and they were very friendly. So they were bringing up their children together, and they were very, very close. In fact, Madame de Polignac was the governess of the children of France, of Marie Antoinette's children. And I said she was doing a very good job after Madame de Polignac left, Madame de Tourzel took over, and she said the children they could read their studies. They were ahead in their studies. They were doing very well. They were very well behaved, well mannered. So she said if you could tell that Madame de Polignac had been doing a very good job as a governess. And of course, she was helped by Madame de Machaut, who was a sub-governess. The sub-governess actually did a lot of the work of the governess. If the governess couldn't be there, the sub-governess actually took over. So perhaps you can attribute it to Madame de Machaut as well. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think it does. It's very interesting, and I think there's a lot to discuss and a lot more that we could do, but I think it's best that we wrap things up for now.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's been delightful talking to you, and I do go on into tangents, but if people want more information, tell them to check out my blog at @Trianon. Not at as in the little @ sign, but just write @Trianon in regular letters. It's a @Trianon blog, and you just do a search on Marie Antoinette, or click on Marie Antoinette on the sidebar. There's a word cloud, and click on Marie Antoinette, and that would bring up all my writings on Marie Antoinette. Now, there's other things on the blog. I read about art and literature and politics and history and science and different things like that. But mainly the main theme of the blog is Marie Antoinette. And also my books are on Amazon.com. You can go to my Amazon page, just Google Elena Maria Vidal, Vidal, and my novels are there, available in paperback. Some of them are in hardbound. They're all in paperback, and they're all also on Kindle. And Madame Marie Antoinette, Daughter of the Caesars, is on Audible, if people want to listen to. So
I might do that. That sounds like a great thing. With all the books I have to read, that might be what I need to do for now.
Well, that would be good. I found that Audible is helpful because I can listen to it while I'm doing other things and cooking or driving, and I don't have to sit still and do nothing but read. I can listen and learn while I'm doing other things. Now, just to warn you, the Audible version of my book, the lady, sometimes she mispronounces the French words.
Okay.
But other than that, she did it. She reads very well, and she reads clearly. So just be warning that people that are upset about French mispronunciation are going to might be a little upset. But other than that, she reads, Courtney read absolutely beautifully. So anyway, thank you so much for having me, and we can get together again sometime.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day. This was Plotlines, and check out Elena Maria Vidal and her all her work, and have a great day. Bye.